County Museum. We have more people coming in. Good. Rarely do I get to board this many people at one time. This is excellent. So, well, let's see. I'm sure you all know me. I have to do my own introduction myself. This is the, let's see, fourth season of our lecture series, and this is the second of the fourth season. My name is Wes Anderson. I'm the curator of the Lawrence County Museum. I'm a graduate of Valley City State University from 1997 and a graduate of Valley City High School from 1993. So, let's see. Hey, Jeff. So, well, let's see. Tonight we're going to talk about the 1918 flu epidemic. I've been doing a great deal of research with this epidemic, a lot of reading, a lot of preparation, and hopefully tonight it all comes together and makes sense. If it doesn't, you're going to have to tell me. So, anyway, it's the time of the year when shadows are growing longer and the days shorter. In honor of this season, I present for your approval a tale of horror not created in the mind of Stephen King, Alfred Hitchcock, or Edgar Allan Poe. This is a murder mystery of a killer that came amongst us 83 years ago, and in a brief span of 120 days killed 100 million people worldwide. Having committed this perfect crime, it then left, never to be caught. The criminal is the common flu.
Is your mic on?
Mic is on.
Oh my God.
Yeah, let's see, turn it up a little more. Okay, no more juice to it. There, now can you hear me? Oh, good. All right, want me to start over? No? Okay, good. Because I'm not going to. All right, so the criminal is the common flu, more properly known as influenza de fredo, influenza of the cold, and specifically the 1918 Spanish influenza. Let's see, tonight I hope to enlighten you with what the flu is, where it came from, what happened locally, and what has happened since 1918. We've all had the flu at one time or another. Its effects last anywhere from a week to maybe 7 days. Then you're back on your feet and feeling normal again. Last year there was a commercial on TV, you might remember it. It had the mailman from Seinfeld. And he portrayed him as the flu coming to your home, as the rude, obnoxious, unwanted house guest from hell that came and made your life miserable until you took their magic little pill and made him go away. Today, we can laugh at the flu. It's an inconvenient part of life, but few of us remember or know exactly what the flu has done and what it can do. There's only a dedicated few scientists out in the world now researching the flu, trying to prevent another 1918 flu from happening. So we'll see what they've been up to. So, what made the 1918 flu so bad that it killed nearly 800,000 Americans and 2,600 North Dakotans? Well, really very few people died of the flu itself. It's more of the complications that are associated with flu, namely pneumonia. 1918 flu, symptoms of it were a rapid onset of flu-like nausea, high fever, chills, muscle aches, and all the wonderful things associated with influenza. People got up, tied their shoes, went to work. By afternoon, they felt a little sick. They went home, and by evening were severely ill, completely prostrate, or they were dead. Some of the rougher cases had cyanosis, a blue tinge to their skin. And this was because they weren't getting enough oxygen in their systems. People that died, autopsies revealed that their lungs, where there should have been lung tissue, actually resembled more like blackcurrant jam. Their lungs were so completely attacked that they were disintegrated. Those who did survive this attack, well, the flu lingered for weeks, actually, trying to get better. Reactions, people had lots and lots of reactions to the flu. Some people lost their sight, their hearing. Some contracted tuberculosis after the pneumonia. A local man, Mr. Borg, remained 5'4" for the rest of his life because it affected his growth mechanism. Robin Williams. Robin Williams was in a movie called Awakenings. I'm sure you all saw it. He portrayed a doctor that was studying encephalitis lethargica. It's kind of a sleeping sickness. And proved a connection between encephalitis lethargica and regular encephalitis, or Parkinson's, excuse me. And, he used Parkinsonian treatment towards the encephalitis lethargica. The connection was that everybody that had encephalitis lethargica also had the 1918 flu. So there's all kinds of connections that can be made with this. So, what is flu? Well, influenza de fredo, influenza of the cold is its old name. It's also known as the grippe, or le grippe. It's an avian virus. It lives happily in the intestines of birds. And when it escapes those little confines, it makes trouble. Influenza has been a continual problem with mankind for about 10,000 years, and 10,000 miserable years at that. It's become known as an interspecies virus, which means that it can hop from one species to another. So it goes from birds to humans, usually with an intermediary in between of a swine. Lots of times it's called swine fever or swine flu. In humans, influenza is an aerosol. Coughing, sneezing, talking, laughing, etc., it all spreads the flu. And of course, it's a disease of crowds. So, you guys are all in luck. But anyway, so, how the flu works. Okay, if those of you who saw The Matrix, the movie, picture this. You sneeze. The particles fly out of your mouth about 300 miles an hour, and then they stop. They hang in space, and they're made viable for about an hour and a half. From there, they're waiting to be inhaled. When they are, you begin a process of taking over the cells, mutating, spreading, and in this process of hyperevolution, this year's flu is not last year's flu, and it won't be next year's flu either. So it's changing, continually changing. What makes the 1918 flu so different? Well, 20,000 Americans and 400 North Dakotans die annually of the flu. I'll have the graph put up now. Will we catch a light? We have here a standard graph of influenza deaths. You can see it's shaped like a letter J. Average mortality visited upon children under 10, and it goes way down very low for young healthy adults, and back up again for people generally over 60. And this is for 1917, but this is a standard graph. So we compare that with 1918. Well, you can keep it going, Eileen. That's fine. Sorry about that. Thank you, Eileen, for doing this. Oh, a little further. This is influenza 1918. A marked difference. It's a bell shape. You have the same amount of deaths for children under 10, but then the age group between 21 and 29 has the highest rate of death, mortality. And then it goes down again. So you see, we compare them. I have another graph laid on top of the other one there. This wasn't rehearsed beforehand, so we're going real low tech tonight. There, you can see the difference. The red line is 1918, and the black line is a standard graph. Looks really different, doesn't it? So, okay, what happened in 1918 that the death curve alone tells so much of the story? Well, okay, when it comes to medical science and medical history, it falls upon sporadic records, sketchy accounts, and few, if any, eyewitnesses. Pre-1918, influenza was an unreportable disease. Nobody kept track of the numbers. And in many places across the world, nobody had any idea of how to keep track of mortality records. So really, when it comes down to it, we have no idea of how many people died. So how many did die? Well, 20 million is about the old guesstimate. If you look into old textbooks, they say 20 million, which is a staggering number alone. But recent studies have proven that actually India suffered 21 million alone. So if you can imagine, Europe had 20 million, Russia about 15 million. There are no numbers for Africa, South America, Polynesia, Asia, or the Middle East. In Eskimos, 90% of the adult population were killed by the influenza. So we have no idea how many numbers were killed. How many of them were misdiagnosed? You know, they had influenza, but it was diagnosed as, typhoid fever, tuberculosis, common ordinary botulism. All of these things that did not define as influenza. So there's a lot of them that escaped that way as well. And when it showed up, people really had no idea what they were dealing with. So it didn't say, hey, I'm influenza. They were guessing. So worldwide, anywhere from 1 billion people to a full 3/4 of the Earth's population suffered with influenza in 1918. It's a mind-boggling number. I think there were probably only 4 billion people at that time. Is that right? Or is it 6 billion now, 4 billion then? Anyway, so in there, so if you have 3/4 of that population suffering with flu, that's a lot of people. In America, there's even still debate. Between 500,000 and 800,000 Americans died. And if this is be the case, we still have the continent with the least suffering. So it's something that makes you stand up and think, what happened? So, why is flu not talked about in history? Well, time is necessary to focus on events clearly. And usually by the time history has this time to reflect, science has moved on to something more advantageous. Dr. Vanderwood here brought me 3 textbooks about medical history. And in them, they came out lucky to have 1 page each referring to 1918 influenza. A lot of people got sick, a lot of people died, worst thing visited upon humanity ever, and then it moves on to the next page. So it's something that's, it isn't covered a lot, because there isn't a lot known about it. Influenza was probably the most tragic and decimating pandemic visited upon humanity. In history books, it's obscured by World War I. The events of the first 20th century mechanized war are horrific. And also it was getting a lot more lip service than flu was. In World War I, a standard paragraph is usually in textbooks in school. So really, World War I gets that much. Influenza, nothing. So it's something that really, it just isn't talked about much. Where did the Spanish flu come from? Spain. No. Actually, Spanish influenza really didn't originate in Spain at all. In fact, how it got its moniker, the Spanish influenza, is simply that when Spanish influenza made headlines, it was in Spain. Sounds like a good title, but in other countries it goes by, the French disease, or those darn Russians brought it. So it's something that's not necessarily belongs to Spain. But I think their tourism industry did hurt after that. So, let's see. There's the unfounded speculation that influenza started in America, at Fort Riley, Kansas. It was in March of 1918 that they were burning tons and tons of manure, of horse manure, and big clouds were sent up from this fire, and soon after it, people started coming down with the flu. Well, actually, probably more people now bring more bearings to mind that it came from Canton, China. China, one of the oldest civilizations of the earth, has had flu recorded throughout its entire history. And in there, they have a unique mixture of chickens, and pigs, and people, that it's kind of just a little cauldron waiting to bubble over. Chinese coolies came, from China to the battlefields of Europe, and they dug trenches, and they did all kinds of dirty work for the war effort. And with them, they brought the flu. And from there, it went to the 4 corners of the earth. How did it spread? You have to remember, influenza is an opportunistic virus. It spread in the air. And so, what better time to thrive than at wartime? Okay, there's massive recruitment of soldiers. There's congestion of train transports, congestion in the camps, congestion on the troop ships, and eventually congestion in the trenches. And then possibly even after that, the hospitals. So people everywhere, spread by a cough that can infect the entire population, within a matter of hours. Also, at home, on the home front, there were the farewells at the train station, there were bond rallies, and victory parades for people to sit and, swap as many germs as they possibly could. So what happened? Okay, influenza traveled in 3 waves. The first wave came in the spring. This was a rather overall mild attack. And it was so mild that it was unremarkable. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody paid attention. But the people who had this mild attack didn't have it the second time around when it came back. Okay, let's see. Immunity subsided during the summer months. Flu, influenza de fredo, is associated with cooler months. In the summer, it goes away. So, strangely enough, in Europe, it was still spreading. And it was coming back in an even more virulent attack in the fall. That's when the second wave hit America. At that time, transportation was reduced with buggies, walking, trains, early cars, and steamships. Communication wasn't much more advanced. Had telegraph, newspaper, word of mouth, and telephone. You've heard the expression, trouble rides a fast horse. Influenza, and word of it, rode a fast horse. It followed the train lines and came with the mail, or rather the mailman. And so, the first small mention of 1918 of flu occurs in the Valley City Times record, September 18th, 1918, and is announced with a pun. It says, Philadelphia Navy Yard was in the grip of the Spanish influenza, brought there by sailors returning on transports. Remember, grip is the old name of flu. Okay, we'll bring up the headline here. It was on September 23rd that we see the first of 2 banner headlines announcing U.S. sailors have influenza. So, this is one of 2, only 2 headlines for the greatest pandemic on earth it receives but 2. Of course, this is the Valley City Times Record. Good paper, but a little isolated. So, down here in the article, it talks about 4,500 sailors near Chicago were sick with the influenza, and there was a predicted death rate of 1.5%. Flu, normal flu, kills but 1/10 of 1% of its victims. And by the end of the Spanish influenza epidemic, it had killed closer to 2.5%. Put on the next one. The next and last better headline is on the 24th, announcing hundreds died of Spanish influenza. That's, well, I think we're good. Yep, we're fine. That's it. That's all. That's it. We're good. So, and this tells of the mounting death tolls in Boston. There are 100 deaths in just 24 hours. A staggering amount. So, any other national reference to the influenza appears in small bulletins, like this, and otherwise any major local notices are limited to front page squares. At this time, the government is assuring the public that despite the deaths and increased cases, the cause of the epidemic has been identified in Italy and is now expected to be under control and possibly on the wane. What they found in Italy is something called Pfeiffer's bacillus. Pfeiffer's bacillus is a small, well, innocuous-looking little bacteria, kind of like a clear sausage. And thing is, it wasn't the culprit. At the time, they had no idea what they were looking for. They were looking for a bacteria. It wasn't until the 1930s when they discovered it wasn't a bacteria, it was a virus. So, October 1st, there's an all-call of registration for nurses. Any nurse, graduate nurse, student nurse, undergrads, trained assistant, practical, midwife, or Red Cross trainee. And this is all for the war effort. This will come to haunt North Dakota as it had 20% of its nurses enrolled in the military service during World War I. More than any other state in the Union. And this left a great shortage when the flu hit. On top of this, North Dakota had 33% of its doctors enlisted in the war. It's a recipe for tragedy. I want to show the picture of the nurses real quick. This is some of the nurses that we had here. So probably have some names in there. This little lady here, she was a nurse during the Civil War. And so here she is again, World War I. October 4th brought the ominous news that influenza is rampant in the cities of the East, and it seems to be moving westward. At this news, some unofficially heard the advice for cities to hunt up your carpenters and set them to building caskets, and get your street workers started digging graves. The Times Record reports there is an unfounded rumor of several cases of Spanish influenza in the city. There is much cold and grip in the city, which may possibly turn into the Spanish disease. We hope not. The Fingal Herald on this day reports the death of 12-year-old Helma Olstead following 3 days' siege of brain fever. Influenza? Suspicions were confirmed in Valley City on the next day when the Times Record announced the sickness of Miss Helma Larson and Walter Koop, employees at the Bank of Valley City. They had the dread disease. It was here. News is reported on the 7th that there are 125 cases of Spanish influenza